After understanding the main Buddhist ideas, which were accepted or partially accepted by Chinese, right now we'll speak about the way of Buddhism from India to China. A lot of people think that Buddhism directly came from India. That's just a part of truth. And I will explain that there are a lot of mistakes and a lot of enigmas about the real way of Buddhism to China. First of all, let's speak about the importance of Buddhist tradition in China. Why Buddhism became so important for China? First of all, because Buddhism signified a first globalization. Buddhism included China to the very huge, very big area of the cultural exchange. So it was the first way of transculturation. A lot of Buddhist ideas and a lot of Buddhism prophets came to China not from India but from the Central Asia. It means that by Buddhism and by Buddhist roots, China became well connected to other regions in cultural sense. So when we speak about, for example, the so-called the Great Silk Road, it was not just a trade route, it also was a Buddhist cultural route. So China became included the first globalization. Another point that was very important for China, Buddhism brought a very tight connection between Chinese and non-Chinese people. A lot of people that recognized Buddhism long before Chinese, long before that Buddhism emerged in China, became much close connected to China and arrived a lot, for example, to Chinese imperial court, especially in the 5th and the 2nd and the 3rd century, especially to Chinese capital Chang'an, and later to the Chinese capital like Kaifeng or capital Luoyang. So all these big cities, Chang'an, Kaifeng, and Luoyang, became populated by Buddhists that came outside of China. Once again, it was the one that gave an impetus to the development of Chinese culture connection. Finally, Buddhism played at least twice a very crucial, very important role for the unification of China. Before Buddhism, China had no any unified religion. Confucianism was not a religion. Confucianism was more moral teaching or political teaching. Daoism was more mythical teaching. Buddhism brought in new ideas, not only moral, but also the idea of the unification under the same idea of Buddha, under the same idea of Dharma, and under the same idea of Sangha, the idea of the Buddhist communality. So that's why at least twice, especially from the 4th to the 5th centuries, China became unified under the idea of the Buddhist unification. So Buddhism played a very important role in the political reconstruction of Chinese life. Let me remind you that Buddhism, that China was not just a country of one nation, of one ethos. There were many ethos, many people existed in China that spoke different languages. And for example, the people from the south part of China didn't understand the people from the central part of China. People from Chang'an, the capital of China, which located in the central part of China, didn't understand people from the northern part of China. So it was a unification of different people with different views and different traditions. So suddenly Buddhism gave a new idea how to unify, how to bring together all these different people. So Buddhism played a role not just as a first factor of the globalization, but the first factor of the unification under the same idea, not only religious, but first of all, political and cultural ideas. It was a long way of Buddhism to China. Usually we speak about the first period of development of Buddhism. We call it the Han Buddhism. Han dynasty existed in China in the 2nd century BC to the 3rd century AD. So it means that during this period, first of all, in this 1st century, Buddhism arrived in China. That time it was not just a one stream of Buddhism. It were many schools and many local teachers that brought different traditions, different canons, different texts, and they propagated different views. So it was not a unified Buddhism. It was just a first attempt to invade to China. That's why, because not one school, even not two schools, but many different schools arrived to China, they used different Buddhist texts, different traditions, and different explanations. What does it mean, Buddha and his teaching? trying to explain Buddhist idea to Chinese people. These teachers from India or from central part of China transformed all these ideas in the way that were much more acceptable for Chinese mind. Transforming Buddhist idea, or transforming just an explanation of Buddhist idea, they also transformed the nature and maybe the meaning of Buddhism. That's why some very important point of Buddhism that existed in India, even in Central Asia, were lost in this way. For example, very huge, very highly developed Buddhist logic that existed in India and Buddhism was very famous by this logic, just lost in this way. No, it existed in China, but was well known just for some very highly developed Buddhists. For everyday Buddhism, logic was not important in China. Another point that speaking about Buddhism, it was speaking about the acceptance of Buddhism by Chinese. Chinese accepted not just a very huge and very sophisticated Buddhist theory. Chinese accepted just some Buddhist images, some pictures that were widespread in China, some rituals and very mythical rituals. So in this way, from India, Central Asia to China, Buddhism were transformed to more Taoist way. So, and this Taoist way was well explained to China. So, for example, Chinese understood first Buddhist ideas as a kind of transformation of Taoism. Buddhism arrived in China, first of all, through Central Asia. And one of the people who were kind of bridge of Buddhist ideas to China were maybe Yuezhi. Why maybe? Because we don't know exactly. We just know some names of the first people who came to China, first travelers, and they were not Chinese. If we look, and we'll speak about it later, about the first translators of Buddhist text from Sanskrit to Chinese, we can see that they were not Chinese. They were maybe from Parthia, from Yuezhi, so it means the non-Chinese people. So they were quite accepted by Chinese, but some of them, by the way, were killed during this long way from Parthia, from India to China. It was an awful time and very dangerous time. Mainly, not just all schools of Buddhism came to China. The main school that arrived to China was a Madhyamika or Mahayana school. Mahayana school, we'll speak about it later, but Mahayana became a most, well, say, democratic school of Buddhism that accepted everyone, not only Buddhists, not only Buddhists from India, but everyone could reach an enlightenment. Two main schools arrived to China. It's Madhyamika and Yogacara. Madhyamika and Yogacara both practiced one very important point: meditation. Especially in Yogacara. Madhyamika mostly spoke about the idea of emptiness, the idea of nothingness, the idea of illusion, and the idea of the overcoming of this illusion by the meditation. But none of this school, no Madhyamika, neither Yogacara, came in a pure way to China. They were much transformed, and finally, step by step, eventually formed a very interesting Chinese Buddhism, which differ much from the Indian Buddhism and from the Buddhism from Central Asia. And that's why China created its own way to understanding Buddhism, and this way was called Mahayana. And what we know about Buddhism today in China or in Japan or in Korea, it's a Mahayana that never existed before Buddhism emerged in China. Mahayana became a real discovery, a real jewel of Chinese Buddhism, and we'll speak about it later.